My brother and I had a spot. A lake tucked behind enough trees that most people never bothered making the trip, which suited us just fine. We'd hike in with our gear, bait our hooks with crickets or worms, and pull out bluegill until we were satisfied. That lake is honestly the reason fishing became such a central part of my life. The locals mostly ignored it, too much effort to reach, and that seclusion felt like a privilege, like we were let in on something others weren't. Most fishermen chase the early morning light, but my brother JJ and I had developed a different rhythm. We'd head out late and stay into the night. For a couple of high school kids, it was our version of a Friday night out, our alternative to whatever parties everyone else was attending. One particular Friday, everything unfolded the way it always did. We arrived as the sun was sinking and had our lines in the water right around dusk. We'd settled onto our usual spot, a natural ledge of flat rocks along the bank that gave us a comfortable platform for ourselves and all our extra gear. Hundreds of times we'd sat in that exact configuration. That's when something across the lake caught my attention. The water. The water on the far side was disturbed, rippling in a way that, now that I saw it, seemed impossible to have missed. I nudged JJ, and we both squinted through the fading light, trying to make sense of what we were looking at. The lake was wide, and the darkness wasn't helping. We stared at those ripples, puzzling over them, and then something began to rise from the water. A dark shape. Vertical, tall. JJ and I swore at the same moment it was a person. Take a second to sit with how strange that already was. Someone standing in a remote lake well after sundown. But it wasn't just that they were there. It was that they had clearly been underwater, submerged for long enough that neither of us had spotted them when we arrived. My pulse jumped, and every instinct I had said it was time to go. JJ pushed back. We barely gotten set up, he argued, and whoever this was, they were far enough away to be irrelevant to us. He had a point, so we stayed. For the next several minutes, we watched instead of fishing. Our rods just sat there, forgotten. The figure was swaying, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. There was nothing erratic about the movement. It was fluid, in a way that seemed almost choreographed, like this person wasn't fighting the water at all, but directing it. JJ floated the idea of a nighttime swim. I reached down and skimmed the surface with my hand, then yanked it back immediately. The cold was brutal. Nobody swims in water like that for enjoyment. I shook myself out of it and told JJ we should get back to fishing. When I looked at him, though, he'd gone completely still. Pole forgotten, mouth slightly open, eyes locked on the far bank. I called his name a few times before it registered. He blinked, picked his rod back up, and muttered an apology. We tried. But neither of us was really present. A few minutes of mechanical casting later, JJ tapped my arm. I looked up just in time to watch the figure slip back beneath the surface. Gone. We both kept staring at the spot, waiting for them to come back up. They didn't. Not after 1 minute, not after 2. I noticed JJ had pulled out his phone and was running a stopwatch. As it climbed past 2 minutes, my astonishment turned into something colder. JJ suggested maybe someone was doing breath hold training. The image that came to mind, a competitive diver conditioning in a freezing, isolated lake in the dark, almost made me laugh. Then it didn't. I started packing our things and told JJ we were done. He held me back, wanting to see how far the breath hold went. Fine, I said, but I kept packing. Just before the 3-minute mark, the water moved again. This time, the ripples weren't on the far side of the lake. They were a fifth of the way across, dramatically closer to us than before. This person hadn't just been holding their breath. They'd been swimming the entire time, underwater, for nearly 3 minutes. I raised my voice. JJ didn't argue. We stood up and started gathering everything, though our feet didn't move yet. We couldn't quite make ourselves leave without seeing. The figure surfaced. It was a young woman. Brown hair, long and wet, dark green swimsuit. She looked to be right around our age, maybe a year or 2 older. And she was, without overstating it, striking. Something in me immediately loosened. The fear dialed back. I started second-guessing our decision to bolt. She spoke first, wearing a small, playful smile, like none of what was happening was remotely unusual. Just a casual hi. Delivered like she'd run into us at a coffee shop and not emerge from a pitch-black freezing lake after 3 minutes underwater. The way she floated there, effortless, completely at ease. It was clear the water was her element, in a way it simply wasn't ours. JJ asked what she was doing. She tilted her head and said simply, "Swimming." He pressed, "Was she training for something?" She smiled again and said something like that, then drifted a few feet closer. Then she asked if we wanted to join her. I found my voice and told her the water was freezing. She laughed and called us a name, then said we'd adjust quickly. JJ declined. She went quiet, pressing one finger to her lips like she was genuinely deliberating over something. It was that pause, or maybe the quality of her eyes, that flipped the switch back. The fear returned, sharper than before. I had a dozen questions. Who are you? Are you alone? How long have you been out here? Do you live near this lake? I asked none of them. Instead, I put my hand on JJ's shoulder, said goodbye to the strange, beautiful girl in the water, and turned to leave. "Hmm?" She screamed. Not a word at first. Just a raw, full-volume scream of no that sent me stumbling backward. JJ and I scrambled to confirm we had everything, and started running. Behind us she kept yelling, "Come back. Get in the water." And then the words stopped and pure shrieking took over. The kind of sound that doesn't belong to a situation that makes any sense. It chased us through the trees. We were halfway to the car before it faded, and the whole time I half expected to hear footsteps behind us. JJ called the police before we even finished the drive out. He reported what happened, and when they asked us to wait nearby for questioning, he told them he didn't feel safe doing that and ended the call. I understood completely. You'd think that would have been the end of our relationship with that lake. It was, but only temporarily. We did go back. The first few times, we brought our dad along. It took some persuading for him to believe us, but he came around and was curious enough to want to see for himself. He never did. We never encountered her again. Eventually, the story became something JJ and I joked about, a piece of shared mythology between us. There was even a stretch where part of us quietly hoped she'd turn up again when we were out there. She didn't. King. Now that enough time has passed and that lake is behind me, I find myself thinking about it more clearly. Stripped of the novelty, what remains is genuinely unsettling. My working explanation is that she was someone in the middle of a mental health crisis. JJ has other theories. I think they're too far-fetched to take seriously. But whatever the truth was, I'm fairly confident nothing quite that inexplicable will find me again. My name's Jay, and if there's one thing that defines me, it's fishing. Lakes, rivers, marshes. I'll take any excuse to get out on the water. Down here in Louisiana, we're spoiled for options. About 2 months back, I headed out with my buddy Angel, who's every bit as hooked on fishing as I am. We decided to go after speckled trout in the marsh, which was nothing new for either of us. The marshes around here run shallow, so we did what we always do and took my 2-person kayak out. It was early spring, still carrying that winter bite in the air, and the water was even colder than that. Neither of us cared. After about 30 minutes of paddling, we settled on a spot that had a good feel to it. The marsh was completely ours that day, not another fisherman in sight. Exactly the way we prefer it. We cracked open some beers and let ourselves fall into that easy, quiet rhythm that makes fishing worth waking up for. About an hour in, Angel hooked into something that had some weight to it. He got excited, maybe too excited, and leaned out over the side of the kayak for a better angle on the reel. I could see what was coming a half second before it happened, but didn't get the words out in time. His phone slipped clean out of his jacket pocket and dropped straight into the murky water below. Angel was furious. He explained that his insurance covered damage, but not a complete loss, and replacing it would run him several $100s he simply didn't have. I didn't blame him at all. I'm not exactly flush with money either. Agwig. I told him we'd do our best to locate it. Even though the water was so muddy, you couldn't see more than a few inches beneath the surface. For the next 20 minutes, we dragged our paddles along the bottom, trying to feel for something solid. It was hopeless. The marsh floor was nothing but soft mud and tangled vegetation, and even though we'd both watched the phone go in, we kept second-guessing exactly where to search. Eventually, I told Angel it was gone, and suggested we try to salvage the rest of the day. Yay, he shook his head. He wasn't leaving without that phone. Before I could say anything else, he was already pulling off his shoes and pants. His plan was to wade in and use his feet to feel around the bottom. And honestly, I thought it wasn't bad logic. Better than blindly poking with a paddle. The moment he stepped into the water, he unleashed a string of curses about the cold. The spot turned out to be deeper than either of us expected, closer to 4.5 feet, judging by where the waterline hit his torso. But he pushed through it and started sweeping the bottom slowly with his feet. Yukel. I sat in the kayak and watched, growing more impatient by the minute. The water was cold enough that I knew he had a limited window, and I was quietly hoping he'd either feel the phone underfoot or admit defeat and climb back in. Then, without any warning, Angel lurched forward and went completely under. One moment he was upright, the next, he was gone beneath the surface. My first thought was that he'd slipped on the muddy bottom, or maybe even found the phone and gone down after it. But seconds ticked by and he didn't come back up. Something shifted in my gut and I stopped thinking. I just started ripping off my shoes and jacket, ready to go in after him. I didn't make it into the water. Angel exploded back up through the surface, drenched in dark mud from head to toe, screaming at me to paddle, now, as fast as possible. I grabbed him and hauled him back into the kayak, and we dug our paddles in hard, putting distance between us and that spot. Angel was shaking, in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He kept twisting around to look back at the water behind us, like he was watching for something to break the surface. Kent. When we'd gotten far enough away, I asked him what happened down there. Can I? He said something had grabbed his ankle and pulled him under. He struggled to describe it precisely. Not a hand, he kept saying, but not a tentacle either, and definitely not teeth. Just something that wrapped around his ankle with extraordinary force. Once he was under, he said it began dragging him laterally, away from where we'd been sitting, and he fought it with everything he had, kicking and thrashing, until he finally wrenched himself free. We packed it in and headed back to the boat launch. Angel never mentioned the phone again. He barely spoke the whole way back. I kept offering explanations, a big catfish, maybe, or an alligator gar, but I could hear how hollow they sounded, and Angel had actually felt the thing, so my theories didn't carry much weight with him. He was adamant that whatever grabbed him wasn't any creature he'd ever come across before. His agitation was genuine enough that it started working its way under my skin, too. I've since spent time researching online, trying to find some explanation that fits. I haven't found one that fully satisfies me. Part of me wants to go back to that exact spot and figure out what's out there. But that part of me is losing the argument, at least for now. What I can tell you is that every marsh fishing trip since that day has had a different quality to it. There's a low hum of unease underneath everything that was never there before. And that feeling has no business being attached to something I've always loved. This is something that happened roughly 2 months ago, and it still crosses my mind more often than I'd like. There were 4 of us, me, Kat, Nick, and Megan, the same crew that ends up together most weekends. We were trying to figure out what to do on a Saturday evening when Nick brought up the reservoir near Megan's place. It's become something of a signature destination for our group, a spot we've returned to more times than I can count. Now, Nick and I were particularly motivated because we'd heard the reservoir was stocked with bass, and fishing is basically a shared obsession between us. Kat and Megan had simpler goals, some drinks by the water and maybe a swim if the mood struck them. Megan's house sits well outside of town, and the reservoir is a short drive, followed by a quick walk through the woods behind her neighborhood. Technically, the land belongs to the county. The no trespassing signs posted every few yards along the chain-link fence make that abundantly clear. But Megan had cut an opening in that fence a long time ago, and by this point it had become a running joke among us, our secret entrance to our secret spot. We thought of it as something we'd discovered that the rest of the world had overlooked. The reservoir itself is modest in size, hemmed in by dense woods on 3 sides, with a narrow access road on the 4th. The water runs clear, and there's a sandy stretch along one bank where we always set up camp. We call it the beach. Flat rocks, good for lying out, the whole atmosphere of something much nicer than it has any right to be. Because it's so tucked away, we can play music loud and let loose without bothering a soul. The sun was already descending by the time we squeezed through the fence. Nick and I began setting up our gear, more out of habit than expectation, while the girls spread a blanket and opened the first round of drinks. It was a good atmosphere. I'd had feelings for Megan for a while, and Nick was in a similar situation with Kat, so the evening already had some pleasant undercurrent to it. The girls were debating whether the water was worth jumping into, when Kat narrowed her eyes down the bank and asked if anyone else noticed the canoe. We all looked. She was right. A little way down the shoreline, half wedged into a cluster of reeds, sat a canoe. It was angled strangely, the way something ends up when it's drifted, rather than been deliberately placed. No rope tying it off, no indication anyone had intentionally moored it there. What struck me immediately was that none of us had ever seen a canoe at this reservoir before, despite visiting it dozens of times over the past year. Nick and I decided to walk down and get a closer look. The girls were comfortable where they were and waved us off without much interest. The walk took about 3 minutes. When we got close enough to actually examine the canoe, something shifted in my chest. It wasn't empty, or rather, it had clearly been occupied very recently and then abandoned mid-activity. A fishing rod was propped against the side, with its lines still trailing into the water. A tackle box sat open on the floor, contents visible, like someone had been actively rummaging through it. On the main seat was a half-eaten sandwich, still in its plastic wrap. And sitting right there in plain view was a phone, screen locked, flashlight on, just sitting there. I asked Nick who leaves their phone behind. He shrugged, but his expression said the same thing mine did. Everything else in that canoe had a possible explanation. Someone hears strangers approaching, panics about trespassing, and slips away quickly. You can rationalize leaving a fishing rod or even a sandwich. But a cell phone? Nobody abandons their phone out of fear, no matter how spooked they are. That detail didn't fit any rational explanation I could construct. We stood there, taking it all in. I know from the outside it might not read as terrifying, but standing over that canoe as the light faded, something about it felt deeply wrong. We had enough daylight left that we should have been able to spot anyone nearby. But there was nobody. Not a sound, not a movement in the tree line. Nothing. We walked back and described everything to the girls. The more I talked through the details, the more unsettled I felt myself becoming. I glanced back at the canoe and watched it rock gently against the reeds, and something in my stomach tightened. The 4 of us sat with it for a few minutes, tossing around theories. Every explanation we landed on fell apart the moment we factored in the phone. Kat said she wanted to leave, and I was quietly relieved someone had said it first. We started gathering our things. Then Megan gasped and pointed across the water. I looked and genuinely had to look twice. On the opposite bank, standing knee-deep in the reservoir, was a person. Even with the sun freshly set, I could make them out clearly. They were holding something long, a rod maybe, or just a stick, and they were completely motionless, facing directly toward us. Yet, they'd been watching us, possibly the whole time. The unease I'd felt about the canoe instantly converted into something sharper. Nobody said it, but we were all already thinking it. Time to go. We collected everything quickly and started moving toward the fence, not quite running, but faster than a casual walk. That's when the yelling started. The person across the water began screaming at us. "Get out, you don't belong here," that kind of thing, which, fair enough, but the delivery was unhinged. He was raging, cursing, completely uncontrolled in a way that made the words themselves almost secondary to the tone. It didn't sound like someone enforcing boundaries. It sounded like someone coming apart. I made the mistake of looking back. He'd dropped whatever he was holding and was wading into deeper water. It took me 2 full seconds to process what I was seeing. Then I yelled at everyone to run. We ran, full sprint to the fence, through the gap as fast as 4 people can manage it. I was last. As I was pulling myself through, I could hear splashing behind me, not close, but there. We didn't stop to assess. We made it to the car and got out of there. 20 minutes later, we were parked in Megan's driveway, still trying to decompress. Kat was badly shaken, close to tears, and Nick's attempts to calm her weren't really landing. I was still wound tight myself. The questions kept circling. Was that screaming man the owner of the canoe? If so, why was the canoe all the way across the reservoir from where he'd been standing? Why was he in the water at all? And the thought that kept needling me most, had something happened to whoever the canoe actually belonged to? And had that person caused it? Megan pointed out the flaw in that theory, though. If someone had done something wrong, swimming across a reservoir and screaming at witnesses is a strange way to avoid drawing attention. Kant suggested calling the police. But what exactly would we report? That we'd been trespassing on county land, found a canoe we had no business examining, and someone yelled at us to leave a place we weren't supposed to be? That call wasn't going to happen. It's been a few months now. We haven't returned to the reservoir. Part of me still wants to go back and find some kind of answer. But I haven't been able to convince any of the others, and honestly, maybe that's the right outcome. Some things are probably better left unresolved.